This video is the third and last presentation about the works of Richard Kauffmann, pioneering architect and town planner in Palestine and Israel, whose widely published photo you see here. The first video focused on his early career planning early kibbutzim and moshavim, agricultural settlements. The archetypical example is Nahalal, a moshav ovdim, or workers' moshav, known around the world for its unique design. The second video continued to explore Kauffmann's prodigious planning of agricultural settlements and garden suburbs around the major population centers of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, as well as the first regional development plan for the Haifa Bay region. This video focuses on Richard Kauffmann, the architect. It should be stated at the outset that he was not a Bauhaus architect, although many have categorized his architectural style that way. His style is more related to the earlier international style, as influenced by his association with Mies van der Rohe in Holland. However, all of his work in Palestine stresses Kauffmann's uniqueness and the individual character of his design, and distinguishes him from the other architects working in Palestine in the 20s and 30s, even those inspired by the international style. Kauffmann's style had similarities to that of the Bauhaus school. Both stressed the functional over the purely aesthetic. Both had simplistic lines and clean facades that eschewed ornamentation and symmetry. You will see later that he was also an innovative structural engineer, as exemplified by his novel roof designs for keeping the inhabitants of buildings that were in extremely hot areas relatively cool. His designs reflected the practical realities of the local environment, such as prevailing winds and extreme temperatures. He also made designs for major hotels, office buildings, medical and university campuses, major exhibition halls, and power plants for the generation of electricity, as well as the communal buildings for the many agricultural settlements he planned. Kauffmann's residential architecture can be viewed today in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Rehavia, where he lived, for example. The house and private clinic, built in 1931 for Dr. Victoria Kruskal, located at 21 Hess Street in Tel Aviv, has been fully refurbished and stands out from the poorly maintained Bauhaus-style buildings of that area, even though it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Although Kauffmann never owned a house, he built for many prominent persons, such as Menachem Yushishkin, an early Zionist leader in Palestine, and for a wealthy Egyptian banker by the name of Agion. The Agion House is now the official residence of Israel's Prime Minister. It is the subject of the next segment. The Agion House that you see in this recent photograph, also known as Beit Agion in Hebrew, is the official residence of the Prime Minister of Israel. It is located at 9 Smolenskin Street, at the corner of Smolenskin and Balfour Street, straddling the upscale Jerusalem neighborhoods of Rehavia and Taubia. Both the residence and the plan for Rehavia were designed by Richard Kauffmann. The residence was completed in 1938 and is an example of the international style of architecture. The house has an impressive pedigree. It was built for a wealthy Jewish-Greek merchant named Edward Agion, an affluent resident of Alexandria, Egypt. Between 1939 and 1940, it served as the home of King Peter II of Yugoslavia at the beginning of World War II. Around the time of Israel's War of Independence, it was converted into a makeshift military hospital. In 1952, the State of Israel purchased the house to serve as the official residence of then Foreign Minister Moshe Sharett. After Yitzhak Rabin became Prime Minister in 1974, it was given its current role as the Israeli Prime Minister's residence. It would be hard to recognize the original building as it exists today. For security reasons, a high wall has been built around it. Several attempts have been made to build a new Prime Minister's residence nearer the main government office buildings. However, the current Prime Minister has stated that the expense would not be worth it, and he prefers his current residence. Here you see an original drawing of the Agian house as conceived by Richard Kauffmann. Quoting from Wikipedia, the building is composed of several square blocks connected to one another, and in the center of the building there is a stairway decorated with a row of windows in the front. The front of the building also includes a section molded in a circular way and in a boat-like style typical of the International style. The building's facade is Jerusalem stone. The building also consists of an inner courtyard or patio, an element that differs from the common International style, but which is commonly found in Muslim-style buildings. The patio was most probably added originally due to the Agian family's request. The common characteristics of the International style include a radical simplification of form, a rejection of ornament, an adoption of glass, steel, and concrete as preferred materials. Further, the transparency of buildings' constructions, called the honest expression of structure, and acceptance of the industrialized mass production techniques. The ideals of the style are commonly summed up in three slogans: ornament is a crime, truth to materials, and form follows function. The International style was a precursor to modern architecture. The big three names in modern architecture in the 1920s and 30s were Le Corbusier, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and Walter Gropius. Kauffmann's work held closely to the principles of the International style, but was more attuned to the unique nature of the Palestinian landscape and environment and the specific needs of the people, as will be seen in the subsequent photographs. Here you see a school designed by Richard Kauffmann for the kibbutz Degania Aleph. Right away you can see the distinctive roof design with its elevated second roof, a substantial height above the interior roof. This lightweight roof reflects the sun's radiation, and what is absorbed is cooled by the breeze flowing between it and the building below. Kauffmann is believed to be the first to employ this natural cooling technique, thus showing his keen intellect and understanding of climatic conditions in Palestine. Notice also the expansive glass windows in two of the classrooms, providing plenty of natural light in the interior. Because school was held in the morning and early afternoons, late afternoon and evening sun shining directly on the windows was not a problem, and would warm the building for the cooler night. Notice also the extensive fields of crops in the background. Degania was the first Jewish communal settlement to be established in Palestine, then under Ottoman rule. It is located at the southern end of Lake Kinneret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. The name is derived from Dagan, which means corn. It's quite possible that the crops in the photo are rows of corn. Although it's called a kibbutz, technically, Degania Aleph was actually a kivutza. The distinction comes from the practice of children sleeping in separate quarters in a kibbutz, but sleeping in their parents' quarters in a kivutza. The kivutza was established with the name Degania in 1911, after succeeding to make a profit from their crops during a trial year as the Hadera commune. Unfortunately, it did so without the benefit of adequate town planning. Kauffmann, when he arrived in Palestine in 1920, went shortly thereafter to Degania. To quote his observation, "I found it a perfect example of incorrect planning. The wind blew from the garbage dump to the barn, bringing flies and odors, and from there to the kitchen, where it picked up all the cooking smells and brought this whole mixture to the dining hall and living quarters." Unquote. The visit led him to recognize the importance of the country's prevailing west wind and to site houses so to exploit its cooling effect while placing odor-producing elements downwind. Kauffmann's attention to climate played a key role in all of his architectural designs, especially those in extreme conditions, as shown in the next photograph. This is an aerial photograph of Dead Sea housing on the northern shore taken in 1931 that is part of a collection by the American colony now deposited in the Library of Congress. It is captioned Dead Sea Potash and can be found in the June 26, 2012 edition of the Jerusalem Post in an article titled Israeli History Photo of the Week, Palestine Potash Company. 4 of the buildings have the additional roof elevated above the main building, similar to the roof of the school in Degania Aleph. The second roof is raised about 2 meters above the main roof of the building to allow wind to carry away the heat and to reflect the heat away from the building. Other photographs of the Palestine Potash Company, now known as the Dead Sea Works, show many more of the old workers' houses with the elevated second roof. These current photographs show them to be in a state of disrepair since the use of electrified air conditioning has made them superfluous. But in their day, such air conditioning did not exist. Richard Kauffmann designed an effective solution for workers living in an area of intense sunshine, the Dead Sea. Moshe Novomaisky, an early Israeli pioneer and scientist, developed the Palestine Potash Company on the shores of the Dead Sea. Novomaisky was born in 1873 in the Siberian village of Barguzin. His family had long been political activists, and his grandfather was exiled to Siberia. Novomaisky discovered Zionism and attended the 1903 Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, for which, upon his return, he was promptly thrown into jail for 5 months. In 1911, he visited the Dead Sea for the first time. With a climate that was the polar opposite of his birthplace, he wrote, quote, "This was something of quite a different order from anything I have known," unquote. In 1920, he immigrated to the British Mandate Palestine and began to use his Hebrew name Moshe. In 1924, he founded the Palestine Mining Syndicate and conducted geological surveys of the Dead Sea. In 1925, the High Commissioner for Palestine granted him permission to continue the survey. The British authorities subsequently issued a tender for mining the Dead Sea area. Novomaisky's consortium won, triggering a debate in the British Parliament revealing the anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist feelings of some members. After gathering support in 1927, the consortium became legally recognized as the Palestine Potash Company. The company grew with 100 families working for it, families who were much more comfortable due to the ingenuity of Richard Kauffmann. This photograph, taken in 1928 by Richard Kauffmann, shows 3 of his creations: a new residence for the prospective owners, and his 2 daughters, Ruth on the right and Esther, my late wife, on the left. This is the only photograph of his children at a building site among hundreds in our Kauffmann family collection, so it must have been quite a treat to go with their father to see what he did in practice. Although too young at the time this picture was taken to appreciate the building methods Kauffmann chose, Esther, later in life, when looking back at her father's work, realized how advanced it was for his time. This building was solidly built using reinforced concrete. You can see the iron rods in the front wall and the temporary wooden support boards that were used to hold up the layer of concrete above while it cured and strengthened. You can also see the outlines of the boards on the outside used to create the forms into which the concrete was poured. Later, the walls would be plastered smooth and whitewashed. Note the cantilevered overhanging structure in the front of the building. It would provide shade in the warmer part of the day and let in light in the evening, a technique common in today's passive solar housing construction. In an article by H. Rao entitled, quote, "Kauffmann Pioneered Rural Planning," unquote, published in the Jerusalem Post on March 7, 1958, a month after Kauffmann's death, he stated that Kauffmann disassociated himself from the local building tradition and was more attuned to the specific social and physical requirements of the country. He was particularly sensitive to the strong solar radiation in and around Jerusalem and other parts of the country. Not only would the concrete overhangs provide relief from direct sunlight, but also the solid mass of the concrete would be slow to heat in the day and slow to cool at night, thus evening out the internal temperature compared to the outside. Rao's article can be found in its entirety at the website www.richardkauffmann.com. This collage includes 2 current photos of the completely restored Kruskal house, one earlier photograph, and a copy of the original plan. If you look on the lower left corner of the plan, you will see Richard Kauffmann's stamp on it, and that it is dated December 20th, 1931. In the upper left photo, you see that the house is located at 21 Hess Street, which is in the UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site. The house sits at the corner of Hess Street and Idelson Street, which are about 2 blocks from the Allenby, 3 blocks from the Tel Aviv Civic Center, and about 6 blocks from the Mediterranean Sea. At the time of the older photograph, you could probably see from the house the blue waters of the Mediterranean. Now, however, there are many large commercial buildings surrounding it. It still stands apart from its neighbors due to its size and appearance. The house was built for Dr. Victoria Kruskal in 1931, and it housed both her clinic and her living quarters. A wing of the Silberman Building of the Alexander Silberman Institute of Life Sciences has the same name, suggesting she was a prominent doctor in her time. Dr. Krusko was one of several well-known physicians of the period residing on Idelson and Bielik streets. The entire first floor was converted for use by the clinic. A third floor was added in 1935. In a travelogue describing the house on Idelson Street, the house was described as among the most beautiful in the city of Tel Aviv. To quote, "This stunning house is huge and is surrounded by trees, cacti, and flowering shrubs." An article on the architecture of Tel Aviv contained further details. To quote, "A study of the ground plan reveals it to be a conformation of squares and a cubic interplay of volumes, imparting a sense of lightness that would remain even after the addition of the story. To achieve a clean, uncluttered facade, the gutter was incorporated with a column at the center of the building. The canopies above the balconies and windows were planned to allow penetration of the level rays of the winter sun and protection from the perpendicular rays of the summer sun. The cantilevered slabs accentuate the building's horizontal lines, as does the rusticated plaster finish of the ground floor wall, with dark brown protruding bands set off by white joints. This ornamentation was Kauffmann's only use of the Art Deco motif on the Krusko house. Kauffmann designed the residences of other prominent persons, including the Hashim Soni house and the Usishkin house. Dining halls were the central communal building of most kibbutzim and moshavim. Not only were they used for meals, but also for important governance, social, and cultural events. Nearly every agricultural settlement had a dining hall that was often the largest building that could hold the most people. It was usually centrally located within easy reach of the members of the settlement. The dining halls were the focus of communal life and were often revered by those who lived with them from their early days and by successive generations. Eating together at the same time, and usually consuming the same food, reinforced the binding forces that held the community together. It also provided a forum for the everyday exchange of ideas, suggestions, comments, and complaints. Richard Kauffmann was responsible for designing dining halls for many of the settlements he planned. Here you see, in the top level of the collage, two well-known examples of dining halls that are representative of his architectural style. They are, respectively, from left to right, the dining halls of the kibbutz Merhavia, located near Afula in northern Israel, and the kibbutz Bath-Sheva, also located in northern Israel, on the boundaries of the Jezreel and Barshian valleys. A notable resident of Merhavia was Golda Meir, the fourth Prime Minister of Israel. On the lower right segment, you see the dining hall of the kibbutz Ein Herod, also designed by Kauffmann. Here, a group from Germany is being welcomed. Last, in the lower left portion, you see a photograph of a Passover Seder gathering in the dining hall of the kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, taken in 1953, a standing room only occasion. All three exterior photos are classic examples of Kauffmann's architectural style, with rectangular doors and windows and plain facades with strong horizontal lines, all of which were characteristic of the international style. They also show the inclusion of climatic conditions in his designs. Note the open shaded space under the Merhavia Hall and the pronounced canopy over the entrance and the row of clear-story ventilation windows in the Hetzibah Hall. A residence designed by Kauffmann is believed to be the first building in Palestine to be at least partially elevated above ground using pillars. Kauffmann's architecture took form in the late 1920s, about the time when the Bauhaus school of design was becoming popular among young architects. Recently, on November 24, 2011, the Bauhaus Center in Dessau opened an exhibit titled Kibbutz and Bauhaus, for which Esther was asked to contribute some photographs of her father's parents. The exhibition opens with a chronicle of the utopias and realities of this development based on specific kibbutzim. Included on the website of its announcement was the photograph of the dining hall at Ein Harod. To quote from the website, "Emerging architects and planners such as Richard Kauffmann and Samuel Bickels brought the ideals and methods of new architecture from Europe to Palestine and had a lasting influence on the planning and design vocabulary of the kibbutzim. A new architecture for the new Israel in a new land." Richard Kauffmann designed several large buildings, some of which are shown here. The top photos in the collage are of drawings made by Esther's father for two prospective jobs. The one on the left was for the Grand Hotel, and the one on the right was to be for the Assicurazioni Generali Corporation, one of the largest insurance companies in the world at that time. Kauffmann did not win that job because the company decided to use the same architect that had built for them in their home country of Italy. The resulting building looks like it was imported from 19th century Italy and is no longer used by the company. Both designs make strong statements expressing the principles of the international style of architecture, with long sweeping curved horizontal lines and generous use of overhangs. The Generali building in particular is suggestive of the characteristic prow front shape that later became prevalent in Bauhaus architecture. Both buildings were to be placed at the intersection of several roads at an open circle and so conformed to the existing space between the roads. Note the absence of ornamental embellishments, as was common in the Oriental style architecture of the time. The bottom row of photographs is of buildings designed by Kauffmann that were built. On the left is the diesel-powered electric generating plant near Haifa. Kauffmann first drew up the plan for it in 1924. He also drew up a plan for a similar power plant in Tiberias. Both were part of an electrification project under the direction of the engineer Pinchas Rutenberg. Rutenberg's own story is quite interesting. When arriving in Palestine after a tumultuous period in the Bolshevik Revolution in the Tsarist Russia, he wanted to start the Palestine Electric Company, but funds were short. He managed to get funding through none other than Winston Churchill, who was colonial secretary at the time. In 1923, Berlin-based architect Erich Mendelsohn was asked to design the Haifa power plant. However, his design was rejected by the British High Commissioner as being, quote, too European, unquote. Kauffmann prepared an alternative plan that was subsequently modified and built. It became operational in 1925 and is said to be the first modern building in Palestine. Both of Kauffmann's power plant buildings made use of reinforced concrete. The drawings can be found in an article authored by Kauffmann titled Planning of Jewish Settlements in Palestine. published in the November 1926 issue of the Town Planning Review, and which can be found in its entirety at www.richardkaufmann.com. In the lower right corner, we see a collage of 4 photographs of the Tozeret Haaretz Pavilion at the Levant Fair, also known as the Orient Fair, which was held in 1932, 1934, and 1936 in Tel Aviv, Palestine. Tozeret Haaretz means produce of the land, and this pavilion was the showcase for the local products and produce of the host country. The photographs are situated at each corner superimposed on another photograph of a 3-dimensional model of the fairgrounds and all of the buildings. Each building housed the items from a particular country. Many countries around the Middle East and Europe were represented. It was, in fact, the equivalent of the World Fair for that time period. Not only did Kauffmann design the Tozeret Haaretz Pavilion, he also assisted in the planning of the layout as seen in the model. The model is surprisingly accurate as compared to an existing aerial view of the fair. You can see the Tozeret Haaretz building in the upper center of the model. In the upper left corner, you see a photo of this towering pavilion taken at the 1934 fair. The lower building in the foreground is a different pavilion. In the lower left corner, you see a sketch of Kauffmann's building showing his stamp and signature. In the lower right corner, you see a photograph of the large sculpture titled The Hebrew Worker. It can be easily seen in the middle of the model. Behind it, in the photograph, is Kauffmann's building. Finally, in the upper right corner, you see a photograph of the interior of the building showing all the different display booths and many people showing great interest. I must also mention that all the Levant photographs can be found on Flickr and are from Philip Messner's Levant Fair group. Before we leave the presentation about Richard Kauffmann's architectural accomplishments, it is worth noting the importance placed on water towers. Kauffmann would typically place the center of a settlement on or near the top of a hill or elevated area. Thus, the water tower for the community, which would be placed on the high point, would also be in the center. Water towers were multifunctional. In the early days, before the tower and stockade outposts were constructed, the water towers would act as observation towers for the purpose of defending the settlement from marauders, which were common, especially during the 1936 to 1939 Arab uprising. As an example of Kauffmann's inventiveness, Esther told about her father's use of mirrors on the watchtowers. Watchtowers would often be equipped with strong floodlights to light up the surrounding area in order to detect attackers at night. Of course, one of the first targets of the attackers would be the floodlight. In order to preserve the floodlight, Kauffmann designed a system of mirrors. The attackers would shoot at the mirrors, which were easily and quickly replaced, leaving the floodlight from being destroyed. Here you see a diverse array of representative water towers in Israel from both early and current times. First, let me point out that all of the photographs were obtained from Wikipedia under the terms of the GNU Free Documentation License. Starting at the upper left-hand corner, they are positioned clockwise in accordance with the founding date of the community. You will see a wide array of uses that these towers have and hear briefly about their local history. The first photo is provided by the town of Gedera, which was founded in the winter of 1884 by members of the Biyu group. Gedera was established on a tract of village land purchased for the Biyuites by Yechiel Michel Pines of the Lovers of Zion from the French consul in Jaffa. The 16.5-meter water tower behind Yeshurun Synagogue was built in 1935. The bottom floor was used as a classroom. The top floor held a water tank and served as a watchtower. The next photo is in the Mizrach kibbutz, which was established in 1923 by the first immigrants of the Third Aliyah, and is situated on a tell named Ruba al-Natra. A tell is a type of archaeological mound created by human occupation and abandonment of a geographical site over many centuries. The Third Aliyah refers to the third wave of Zionist immigration to Palestine from Europe between 1919 and 1925 following the end of World War I. Richard Kauffmann and his wife Bath-Sheva were early members of the Third Aliyah. The next photo is in Yad Mordechai, which was first established in the 1930s by Hashemir Hatzar members from Poland. However, the 14 dunams allocated to the kibbutz was too little and insufficient to develop the kibbutz. As a result, the community moved to an area near Ashkelon in December 1943, and with the new settlement, named in honor of Mordecai and Selewich, who died fighting the Nazis while being the commander of the Jewish fighting organization in the Warsaw Ghetto. The next photo is the water tower in Eilan, established on 400 dunams of land purchased in 1938 by the Jewish National Fund. The kibbutz was settled that year by a group of Polish immigrants and Palestinian Jews. Eilan was one of the early tower and stockade settlements. Today, the tower is the office of the music center Keshet Eilan. A world-renowned violin master course called Keshet Eilan takes place annually in Eilan. Under the musical director of Itzhak Rashkovsky, 50 young violinists from around the world spend each summer receiving extensive violin instruction and performing concerts. The next photo is in the kibbutz Alonim, established on June 26, 1938, as part of the Tower and Stockade Settlement Campaign. The settlers were the first graduates of Youth Aliyah. The objective of these settlements was to seize control of land that had been officially purchased by the Jewish National Fund, so to have as much Jewish-owned land as possible populated by Jews. These settlements would eventually be transformed into fortified agricultural settlements and served for security purposes. The Youth Aliyah is a Jewish organization that rescued thousands of Jewish children from the Nazis during the Third Reich. Youth Aliyah arranged for their resettlement in Palestine in kibbutzim and youth villages that became both home and school. The next photo is of the remains of a water tower in the kibbutz Negba, which was founded in 1939 as a tower and stockade settlement, the first lasting modern Jewish settlement in the Negev desert. In the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Israeli military engaged in many battles with Egypt. The kibbutz was destroyed in the heavy fighting, which went on for 3 months. On November 9, 1948, after the defeat of the Egyptian army in Operation Yoav, the town was recaptured by the Israel Defense Forces. The next tower is in the area of Itzhak Wells in the Negev of biblical fame. Yitzhak was, by profession, a well digger. This shelled water tower is near the remnant of the historic site and was established in 1943. According to the record of battles for independence, this area was the focus of battles of the southern region of the War of Independence, near the city of Bath-Sheva, which was the southernmost town settled by the Israelites. The next photo is in the kibbutz Shamrat, which was founded in 1948 by Moshe Hatzer members from Slovakia and Romania. Some of the founders fought with the partisan forces against the Nazis in Europe, while the majority came out of various Nazi concentration camps. Hashemir Hatzer is a socialist Zionist secular Jewish youth movement founded in 1913 in Galicia, Austria-Hungary, and was also the name of the group's political party in the Yishuv in the pre-1948 British Mandate of Palestine. Finally, the last photo is in Ein Dor. Ein Dor was founded in 1948 by members of the Hashemir Hatzer youth movement. The founders were from Israel, Hungary, and the United States, and were joined later by members from South America. All of these photographs lead one to the history of the struggle of Israel to become a nation. Kauffmann was responsible for planning many of these settlements. In this last view of Richard Kauffmann's life, we bring to a close the sixth in a series honoring the memory of my late wife, Esther Kauffmann Forsen. The main focus of this video was on Kauffmann's architectural accomplishments, ranging from his inventive solutions to the extreme climatic conditions faced by the Dead Sea potash workers' quarters, to lovely homes of persons of stature in Palestine, to communal dining halls that served as the focus of settlement life, to larger industrial and exhibition buildings. He was largely consistent in his use of reinforced concrete, a fairly new technology at the time, and used it to express his manifestations of what has been called the international style, with which many well-known pioneers of modern architecture were associated. His work was a precursor to, and sometimes erroneously characterized as belonging to, the Bauhaus school of design, and his use of overhanging projections and natural ventilation are the foundation of today's passive solar design. In many ways, Kauffmann's keen mind in addressing the needs of his clients, who were many, provided solutions that were way ahead of his time. Kauffmann was most prolific in the earlier years of his career. Towards the end, his opportunities dwindled as the next generation of architects and planners succeeded in obtaining government positions in the new state of Israel and in taking the lead in capturing much of the large construction projects. Esther has said that she remembers that her father would keep his staff fully employed with full wages even when there were fewer projects, and that her own wages were used to supplement the family's income used for daily subsistence. When faced with imminent death, Kauffmann regretted not having provided for the future of his family. But he was a most generous man when it came to helping others, as discussed in an earlier video. He will be remembered mostly as an architect and town planner, as you can see from the inscription on his tombstone, which states simply in Hebrew, "Planner of the town and the settlement in Israel. There were many who praised Kauffmann for his work both before and after his death on the 3rd of February in 1958. The following quotations are from articles that can be found in their entirety at www.richardkauffmann.com. In an article published in the Jerusalem Post on June 20, 1957, titled, quote, "An Appeal to Richard Kauffmann on his 70th birthday today," unquote, the author, Heinz Rau, himself a prominent architect, states, quote, "It is a long time since we first met when Richard Kauffmann built those fine houses on the shore of the Dead Sea that were so completely adapted to the difficult climate down there and breathed so well. In their aesthetic modernity, the atmosphere of that lonely and majestic depression. Never again, despite all endeavors, was the quality of this achievement equaled in our country. Building those houses were really not much more for Richard Kauffmann than a diversion from his real work of planning in a wider field. Yet they have remained for me the best example of his true approach to planning, the only possible approach to planning that is really his, honesty." Rau ends his appeal with this admonition, quote, "The position of anyone who remains outside the struggle is therefore as regrettable as it is enviable. He should fight not with words, spoken or written, but with deeds, planning and building, just as he did in those bygone days. The profession's best wishes to the man who has done so much for it include a hope that his 70th birthday may prove a turning point in this respect," unquote. It's quite possible that the cancer that finally took his life was at this time already sapping his strength. In an article published in the Jerusalem Post on March 20, 1959, about a year after Kauffmann's death, titled, quote, "Pioneer of Planning, Tribute to Work of Richard Kauffmann," unquote, the author, Ariel Kahan, wrote at length praising Kauffmann's contributions to the planning of settlements, towns, and college campuses, but ended by stating, quote, "Kauffmann's artistic approach and the method of his office, and characterized by the high quality of graphic rendering in his drawings and perspectives. Therefore, it seems fitting that his graphic legacy, which is professionally and artistically as well as historically important, is to be handed over to the Zionist archives. Richard Kauffmann was a trailblazer for his profession and his country, yet it was unavoidable that the ideas he represented became common property and were followed out by younger men who no longer pondered the fact that Kauffmann had been their mentor. After independence, he continued to be recognized as the profession's dean, but was no longer offered the scope of work that would have satisfied him. To the new generation of planners who had to find solutions for much wider and more complex tasks than before, he was ready to give advice and constructive criticism, but these were taken only partially. After a rich life of full recognition, this disappointment darkened his last years. It is not enough that his memory lives on for his friends and colleagues. The official histories of Zionism and Israel architecture will have to give an appropriate place to Richard Kauffmann," unquote. It has been this very goal that my wife, Richard Kauffmann's daughter, had undertaken and been the dream of much of her life, and it is the one that I am committed to carrying out in her memory. All of Kauffmann's works, his plans, drawings, and his personal papers were given by his wife, Bath-Sheva Kauffmann, to the Central Zionist Archives shortly after his death. The trusteeship for the collection was in the hands of Esther, and in accordance with her will, are now mine to execute. in addition to several other articles that are too many and too long to be included here. I should mention that www.richardkauffman.com website contains the complete translation of the treatise on Kauffman, written by Lottie Kahn, an architect who was an early assistant to Kauffman before establishing her own firm, and who was a great admirer of Kauffman. We obtained a copy of this work, which is biographical in nature, and was dedicated to Bath-Sheva Kauffmann, and we had it professionally translated from the original that was in German. The work treats not only Kauffmann's career, but is a portrait of the man and his character and ideals. Lottie Kahn was also the designer of the tombstone that you see in the photographs from an article by Inez Zander. To quote from the text of the article, Lottie Kahn was commissioned by his widow Bath-Sheva to design his gravestone. She wrote about her 2 different drafts. One sketch is for a flower bed or green plantation covered with a little stone. The other is to cover the whole grave with a flagstone with a bush as a tree, as the headstone. She goes on to say, in both drafts, I intended the stone treatment to be brutalist, preferably natural. With this, I think about our poor Richard, who loved natural, not artificial, treatment.